it's not about trying to stop being dysregulated. It's about sending your autonomic nervous system safety cues to help you regulate.
You know, we've talked about what goes on in my brain. What is going on in my body in terms of the nervous system?
This is a survival state. This is going to bypass all your intelligence and all of your knowing and all of your wisdom, because this is a matter of survival.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be coming to you today with two of my favorite people. We're going to be talking about the central nervous system. So today, obviously, we have Sarah. Hello. But we also have Abbie, and Abbie's one of our coaches. She's been with us for 2 years, coming on 2 years now, which has been just awesome. She has a master's of genetic counseling, and she has worked in bioethics research, but she's recently become, or maybe not so recently, she's recently, written a huge document about the central nervous system and, going through it. And so we wanted to talk to her a little bit today about her interest in the central nervous system and what it means for people with ADHD. So great to have you on today, Abbie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So my first question for you is basically because I got it wrong. What is the nervous system? Because I know about the central nervous system coming from more of a neuroscience background, but you also talk about the autonomic nervous system. So take me through what's going on here. Where is this in the body?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it can be easily confused. And if we kind of have school level biology, I think it may not have sunk in terms of what these sorts of things are responsible for. And of course, as time goes on and research progresses, we learn more. So essentially, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. And for the purposes of our discussion today, we'll be talking about the autonomic nervous system from the perspective of the sympathetic branch of the nervous system and the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. And those nerve fibers run from the brain into the spinal cord all throughout the body. So they're responsible for your involuntary functions like breathing and regulating your heart rate and all those types of things, but also for interoception and scanning your environment and interpreting what is going on around you. Because we are one moving part. We're not like a brain in a body. It's all connected. And if you think about all those things together, essentially what the brain and body are doing together is picking up internal and external cues from the environment to figure out, are we safe? Are we comfortable? Do we feel like we belong? All of those kinds of things to continually give and help direct our behavior, essentially.
This is so interesting. And so you said it's the autonomic nervous system?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in for anyone who might be curious where actually the autonomic nervous system is located in the body. And it's sort of like multiple points, right? It's all the way from the head, there's regions sort of in the spinal cord, the neck, the thorax, the abdomen, and the pelvis. So we're looking at sort of like a major root system. And then for anybody else who's wondering, there's also the central nervous system, which we talk about on this podcast all the time. But then there's also the peripheral nervous system, which for all intents and purposes is like your nerves, the nerves that run all throughout your body.
Yeah. I think thinking about it as a root system in your body is a really great way to imagine it kind of branching out. And so, Abbie, I don't know how much you have gone into this, so, forgive me, but what is the kind of history of this stuff a little bit? When did we start looking into this? Because I can imagine for a while, not much would have been known about this part of the body.
Yeah. So I guess with respect to nervous system regulation and how it can impact us from that perspective in terms of, our emotions and our daily experiences and how it can show up in behavior and patterns and things like that. It was introduced by Dr. Stephen Porges, who was a researcher in 1994. And he initially did studies on newborn babies. The initial measurement that they used was something called heart rate variability. And heart rate variability essentially describes the variation in your heartbeat. So like some people might think if you're at rest, you might have 70 beats per minute. But actually what happens is when you breathe in, you get activation of the sympathetic nervous system, so your heart rate goes up. And when you breathe out, you get activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, so your heart rate goes down. And you get internal and external cues that will also change your heart rate, essentially. So the more heart rate variability you have, the more you are in your body responding to cues, responding to external cues, and you're likely to be more socially connected as well. So what he found was that babies who were more bonded to their mothers had a higher heart rate variability than babies that didn't.
Wow, that's so interesting. When did it become something that they were looking at in the body? Like, did they do body scans sort of the same way they do with, fMRIs in the brain?
It's a good question. I don't know, like the anatomical hypothesis that underpins sort of nervous system regulation from this perspective. And this is sort of underpinned by something called polyvagal theory. If you want to do a deep dive, big recommend. It basically combines ideas from evolutionary biology and neurology to demonstrate that a lot of our autonomic reactions and behaviors have adapted to the development of neural circuits.
Interesting.
Can we maybe define autonomic?
Yeah, of course.
I feel like it means the automatic processes, the heart rate sort of is meant to regulate itself. You don't have to consciously like think about it and be like, oh man, like really got to get my heart rate back into the correct rhythm. Like that's not how it works. We're also supposed to just breathe on our own, believe it or not. So
I'm a breath holder.
Yeah, same.
Does that definition check out?
Yeah, definitely. So it does. The autonomic nervous system will govern most of the involuntary biological processes that happen. I think the thing here is that it's not just your heart rate and digestion and all of those kinds of things. It is also interpretation of social cues and response to your imagination, response to stories you're telling yourself, or the way people speak to you, or if someone makes a funny face at you, that goes through your autonomic nervous system first. And what we know, which I think is really, really interesting, is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is one of the branches of the autonomic nervous system, is the vagus nerve, which is on everyone's lips at the moment, which is a great thing. And we know that if we're talking about the communication between the brain and the autonomic nervous system, we know that 80% of the messages go up from the autonomic nervous system to the brain and 20% go down.
Where do they go?
Yeah, well, they go to a lot of different places because the autonomic nervous system is so intimately linked with so many different parts of the nervous system that govern, how our body is functioning, how we're feeling, but also how we're interpreting the world, how we're feeling about how dangerous or safe the world feels, how friendly other people feel. It's got its fingers in every pie in the brain as well. But I think that the most important thing, or I think the most profound part of this for me, has been, I think, number one, just acknowledging that I'm not just a brain in a jar walking around, because that's what it felt like for a really long time.
Yeah.
And also that these are all, my nervous system, whether I'm comfortable or not, and for a long time I was very uncomfortable, is adaptive. It's doing exactly what it's been designed to do based on what is going on internally and externally. And all of it makes sense, and it will bypass any kind of cognitive thinking, even if you know better. I think sometimes I used to rely on knowing and understanding things and thinking that was the end of the story. But I've got this, 500 million year old part of me that I share with fish that is going to take over if I don't feel safe.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry.
I know. But I mean, that brings me to my next question, which is probably some people are wondering, okay, cool, but like, what does that have to do with ADHD? So that's my question for you, Abbie. Why are we three people with ADHD having this conversation?
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, firstly, we're humans, so that's one, and we're mammals and all of that kind of thing. But I think specifically from an ADHD perspective, I know there's been a lot more awareness about something that I guess isn't part of the clinical picture in terms of a diagnosis, but I think is a shared experience for most, if not all of us, which is the impact of emotional dysregulation, or, things like anxiety and loss of energy and all of those kinds of things that a lot of us share and don't really understand and tend to blame ourselves for, make sense from the perspective of, this very primitive part of us, but also we can overlap the differences that we see in the brains and bodies of people with ADHD that explain why something like regulating the nervous system is really hard, and why being dysregulated is more likely for us, which is not meant to be a doom and gloom thing. There are things that we can do, but I think this helps to paint a picture that I hope will, at least it's helped me do this, and I hope will for other people, is to help take some of the shame out of these sorts of experiences, because it biologically makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this seems very much in line with a lot of the synaptic pruning research that I've been reading.
As you do.
Yeah, just like in my spare time, randomly found it scrolling on TikTok. Can I even sum that up? I mean, the studies are referring to in neurodivergence, so that's ADHD and autism specifically. They're looking at like hyper or hypo connectivity of the brain.
Yep.
So, your brain is either making rapid connections or sort of not enough. And so that can impact how the nervous system is functioning.
Absolutely.
Because of all those sneaky connections that are just like waiting to get pushed, and then they're going to like push another thing, right? I don't know, maybe I'm getting ahead of us.
No, not at all. I think that that's a huge part of what we observe with the challenges that we see. There's like in terms of synapse. So we're born with all of the neurons that we'll ever have, right? It's all about the connections that are made. And as a caveat, I will say here, we can't increase the number of brain cells we have, but we can change how they're organized and wired, which is where all the hope and the joy and the is here, right? We can have all of these experiences that shape our nervous system, but ongoing experiences can reshape it. So that's just my caveat for this bit. But what we know from the research is that people with ADHD seem to have, there are some things that we share. For example, research shows that individuals with ADHD often experience chronic overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. So that is your fight, flight, appease response. So that is when you're mobilized to act, essentially. If we're thinking about being chronically busy, not being able to rest, not being able to stop, constantly thinking about, problem solving, trying to change things, all of that kind of stuff. Like if a client was talking to me and they were telling me, I can't sit down, I've got all of these problems to solve, I would be thinking, I think we've got someone who's in sympathetic activation here. The research is mixed, and I think it's because this is probably more complex than just, we have more sympathetic activation and less parasympathetic activation. But broadly speaking, we also see that there's lower parasympathetic activity. So that's lower activity of the vagus nerve, which, as I was talking about before, is the nerve that helps to manage heart rate variability. So we see in people with ADHD, we tend to have a lower heart rate variability, and that would impair the ability to relax and recover from stress. So if we're talking about burnout, makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And we've just talked a little bit. There are so many other parts of the brain and nervous system connection that make sense in terms of ADHD and dysregulation.
Hey, you listening to this podcast. If you like what we do and you want to hear more of it, there is one way to make sure that happens. Please go ahead, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. We have been told 5-star reviews can help us to get seen by more people, which means more people are going to learn about ADHD strategies.
Just press the button. Just give us a 5-star review.
I want to pause you there slightly because I think we've delved into something and that I want to just make sure we're bringing everyone along on. Because it was interesting, this conversation. I think we talk about the brain so much and we're talking about the body today, which is such a difference for us. So you were talking about this idea of obviously emotional dysregulation with ADHD. ADHD, we have a lot of emotional dysregulation. That makes sense. And then you were talking about the parasympathetic nervous system and other nervous systems. So can you take me through let's say I am at work and my boss says, I need to meet you in an hour.
Oof.
And then leaves. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
We've had those moments, right?
Yeah.
What is going on? We've talked about what goes on in my brain. What is going on in my body in terms of the nervous system?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting one. It would depend on who you are.
Let's say I'm me.
Let's say you're you. So I think one of the most profound things, and I rest on this personally a lot in terms of nervous system regulation, is that the way that we are thinking and the stories that we tell ourselves can give us a pretty clear indication of what nervous system state we're in. That might be something new for people as well. It certainly was for me. I think I lived a lot of my life, and we're socialized this way to believe every single thought I had and every single feeling I had and to buy right in. Dysregulation is deliberately compelling because it is about survival. The issue we have in modern living is that our quote unquote survival struggles are more about belonging and self-image and more complex relational things than food scarcity or predators, right? So they're more existential. But we do have a nervous system that is wired for how we lived 30,000 years ago, which would have been, I would suspect, quite different.
Yeah, I don't know if that would have been the worst thing that happened to me that day.
Yeah, right. And you probably couldn't sit down and scroll on TikTok for half an hour to chill out.
Yeah. So let's say you are, in that position and you're thinking, oh my gosh,
yes,
they're mad at me. Something bad is going to happen. This is clearly like a negative thing. So, what then happens to my, I can imagine that, my heart rate goes up, my breathing probably gets shallow. Like, what does that mean for the central nervous system?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So what is happening all the time is the autonomic nervous system is constantly scanning for internal and external cues of danger and safety. If that doesn't resonate with people, it might be signals of okay and not okay, or of comfortable and uncomfortable, whatever resonates with you. It's just, in terms of the research, they talk about safety and danger cues. That is picked up as a big danger cue, right? If you're going, you're feeling like things are not okay and something bad is coming. And what I would suspect from that is that there has been activation of the nervous system. Something's not okay and I have to do something. That is what the sympathetic nervous system is designed for. It is designed to mobilize and activate us and to help us manage problems, or to help us get out of danger, or to help us set boundaries. This will come up when a boundary is crossed or if something is not okay.
So we're sort of talking like the 4 responses, right? We're talking like fight, flight, fawn, freeze.
So the model is sort of slightly different with this framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
Slightly different. So the framework that I'm working from is fight, flight, shut down, freeze, and appease.
Appease is an important one, I think.
That's similar to fawn. The reason why I use appease and prefer appease is because I think fawn can make people feel like, I think it can be a little bit shaming, or it's like it's their fault.
Yeah.
All of this, again, is to say that everything's working right. Like if your boss says, I need to speak to you later, and you freak out, your nervous system's working the way it was designed to.
Yeah. Can I take a moment and just ask everybody, what are you? Does everyone feel, are you fight, flight?
I'm a freeze. My home away from home. Well,
depends who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sarah's a fight.
Yeah. I'm freeze without a doubt.
Gosh, I don't know. This lady came up to me asking for money in the parking lot, and I was terrified, and I just started crying, and I was so sorry about it.
Oh.
So honestly, I know I talk a big game, but actually, I was so sad that I couldn't help her.
Oh,
sorry. Maybe we should cut that.
No, I want to give you a hug. I want to do some co-regulation with you.
Well, we are going to do co-regulation in a moment.
We're already doing it.
But I thought it would be good to ask because I know we don't talk about this a lot. And by the way, if anyone wants to know, I'm fight, for sure.
We've got all the flavors.
Yeah, we got every single flavor. Yeah, because I think we don't necessarily like share as a community. We're always like, "What's your personality type? What's your like?" But it's like, how does your nervous system react with your like? These are questions we don't ask as much.
Yeah. Deb Dana is an incredible expert in this particular area on how to tend and befriend your nervous system, essentially. And she talks about people having, like, the place we want to be in most of the time is called safe and social. That is the most evolved part of our nervous system. It's where things are balanced. The vagus nerve is soothed. We feel optimistic, connected. We can socialize, all of those things. That was something that was completely foreign to me. I don't think I'd ever been there until about 3 years ago. So if anybody else is feeling like, what is that? That is okay and normal. Modern living is very stressful and bright and loud and all those kinds of things.
It's also okay to slip in and out of feeling safe and sound.
You're meant to. I think that's also another thing that I think is important to say about quote unquote nervous system or emotional regulation is it's not about being regulated all the time. It is not about being calm and happy and relaxed all the time. It is about developing strategies to be able to bounce back and to break chronic dysregulation cycles, right? We're meant to be dysregulated. This is how we move through the world and interpret what is going on for us internally and externally. And it's really important. Shutdown sounds like quote unquote bad. I really don't try not to moralize things. It sounds bad, right? It's usually where we feel like I can't do it anymore. It is a place where essentially the body's gone, I haven't been able to deal with the stress because being in a highly mobilized fight or flight, appease state is stressful. It's very resource intensive. It will get to a point where the body will go, okay, well, the stress isn't going anywhere. So I'm going to conserve as much energy as possible. I'm going to give you brain fog. I'm going to make things feel hopeless. So you stop and lie down and rest, essentially. And I think that's really challenging for people with ADHD, right? Because we already feel like we're behind and we don't have enough time. And so rest can be really elusive, but I hope that in some way this can help elucidate like why stress can be elusive. And I think there can be this sort of war between what we know and what our nervous system is telling us. And part of like nervous system regulation work is bringing those two things together.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's awesome. So I'm excited to get into it. I'm sold. Like, what do we do?
Okay, I'm crying. What's next?
Yeah, my boss is still going to tell me, in an hour, like, how do I deal with this nervous system?
Yeah. So if we use that example again, let's say we're Sky and we're in fight, right? Fight is essentially a nervous system state to mobilize us to act and protect ourselves. If you are someone who might be stuck in a chronic stress cycle and there is stuck fight energy there, you might do what I used to do, which is fight with people about politics on the internet. Right? Now I know when I feel compelled to do that, I'm like, I can make a different choice. I can still make that choice and there is nothing wrong with it, right? Sometimes it can be fun. What essentially needs to happen is if you think about what a fight state might have been for 30,000 years ago, it might have been to physically get somebody out of your space. It might have been to yell at somebody. It might have been to protect somebody else. Like there's lots of movement involved in like a mobilization state. However, you've just been sent an email. You may want to throw your computer out the window, but I suspect you won't, right? So what we can do here is acknowledge that we've got all of this stuck energy. And if we go back to what I was saying before about the messages from the body to the brain, this is a survival state. This is going to bypass all your intelligence and all of your knowing and all of your wisdom because this is a matter of survival, right? And so what we need to do is do something about that energy. Otherwise, what you get are just messages from the autonomic nervous system to the brain. We are unsafe, we are unsafe, we are unsafe. And that's how we can get stuck in these sorts of chronic cycles, because we are not doing anything with the reaction that has been created. And then that can flavor everything that happens to you. You get in the car and drive home and you have road rage, and you get home and I don't know. One of my indicators that I'm in a sort of fight state is if my dogs are annoying me, because I love them so much. But if they start irritating me, I'm like, oh, something spicy is going on in here. And I think that I think this is actually a really good one to discuss, because fight energy is like intimately related to anger, and we are socialized out of expressing anger.
As women.
And particularly as women. And so what I would say here is that the through line is like, how am I thinking? What story am I telling about this scenario? I think for many of us, because so much of us think a lot. So I think cognition can be a really great way to enter this work from a familiar place, right? And then if you go, okay, well, I'm in a fight state, so it might be helpful for me to, this is what I do, is I push really hard on a wall like I'm pushing a truck.
Yeah.
Until I feel a shift, right?
Yeah.
If nobody is around, I might bury my head in a pillow and scream, which is something I couldn't do for a long time, right? Because my body just wouldn't let me. But sometimes I'm like, I just want to scream, and I do that. And that's been a long process for me to get to a place where I can express myself that way, because I think socialization can really impact how we feel we can respond to ourselves. And I would always say to anybody who's doing this kind of work, take it as slow as your nervous system needs you to take it. If you get an internal no to something, it's not for you right now.
Yeah.
And that's also part of building, I guess, that connection between your mind and your nervous system.
Wow, that's so cool.
I'm just wondering if Abbie wants to describe what it feels like to notice a shift. Because, like, for me, I start tingling. Like, I'll start tingling from, like, the center of my body, and then it goes through to my fingertips. It's sort of like an ASMR feeling, but, like, on my body, not just my head.
Wow, that's crazy.
I love that.
But that's only when I'm like super bad, you know, if I'm like working on a massive shift here. Obviously, it can be as simple as, oh, I'm breathing again.
That big time. As a breath holder, that is one that's also like an indicator for me. I relate to that, Sarah. Like, it's taken me, and maybe we can talk about this on a future podcast to talk about meditation, but doing this work has allowed me to build a meditation practice as well, which was something that eluded me for 20 years or something. And I find if I'm meditating and I'm able to get myself to a place where I am starting to feel more connected and starting to relax and things are sort of starting to unwind, I do feel that it's kind of like a fizzy, effervescent kind of energy kind of returning to where it's meant to be. It's that sort of kind of, it's not very scientific, but that's kind of what it feels like.
It's okay. It's so late in the pod. If you guys are still listening, you know, you know, we've done this science at the beginning.
But if we're talking about, particularly like so many people with ADHD, if we're talking about, a system that has heightened activation, we also, I think it's important to mention, have lower connectivity or like altered connectivity with the insular cortex in the brain and the autonomic nervous system and the amygdala. So that means the insular cortex is responsible for emotional regulation, right? It's for making sense. It helps us make sense of what's going on, and we have reduced connectivity there. And so I think what can happen for us is we have a big reaction or we have a feeling, and our brain does what it's meant to do, which is to try and figure out what is going on. We are positive predictive machines, and it will try to make sense of things. Essentially what happens is when we're feeling stressed, whatever state we're in, your mind is trying to make sense of the physiological feelings of stress by creating narratives that align with how your body feels. And that makes sense.
Because that's proof to you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
These stories might not be fully accurate, but they're your mind's way of rationalizing the state that you're in, right? We are socialized to try and rationalize everything and to explain everything. I mean, we're doing it today, but I think it can be supportive. Sometimes it's not so supportive. If your nervous system were more regulated, the stories you'd tell yourself would be different. They might be more balanced, more hopeful, more confident. So the state that you're in is driving the thoughts and feelings that you're having, and not the other way around. Story follows state. And I think that is a really important part of this. And in terms of talking about shifts, in terms of, there might be sensations, you might feel relaxation in your shoulders. When I'm working with clients, before we do some sort of nervous system regulation, I'll ask them to look left and right to see how far their head can turn, because we carry a lot of our tension up in our neck and our traps. And then afterwards, I'll ask them to do it again.
That's so sneaky.
Yeah. And so you can get some evidence that there's been some sort of relaxation because you've got more mobility in your neck.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if your stories change, or if the nature of your thoughts change, that's also a pretty good indicator that there has been a shift.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going from things feel like this is awful and I can't do this and I have to cancel, to something like maybe it might be okay and I'll just see how I go, that is quite a big cognitive shift that is suggestive of a big nervous system shift.
Yeah.
But that can happen really quick.
Well, speaking of, you said that you had an exercise that we could try.
Oh,
is that still the case?
No, it's I'm trying to pick which one to try.
Oh gosh.
I'll walk you through one that is easily accessible and helpful for up-regulating the parasympathetic nervous system. So if we think about this, what we're doing is we're engaging in something that is sending safety cues to the autonomic nervous system. What we want to do with emotional regulation is it's not about trying to stop being dysregulated. It's about being intentional about sending your autonomic nervous system safety cues to help you regulate. So trying to balance the scales a little bit. So this is called the seaweed. I'll try and describe it as best I can.
Well, Sarah can send a clip of us doing it.
She's already doing it. So what you want to do is you can do it standing or you can do it sitting. This is particularly good if you find that your mind is racing, or those moments where you feel like you can't make a decision or you can't start work, you feel really stuck. Often that is indicative of freeze, right? And freeze is basically fight, flight with a tiny layer of shutdown on top, right? It's when we're on our way down to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we need to do is introduce some very slow and gentle movement. Now, I know that can sound like agony for someone with ADHD. However, if you bring the same bricks to the building site, you're going to build the same house. So if you feel like you've got the space to try something different, I reckon this is the best thing to try, particularly if people are really new to this sort of stuff. So the seaweed, you can do it standing or sitting, right? And what you want to do is from the hips to the crown of your head, as slowly as possible and as small as possible, right, is to sway and we can do that. You can do the neck check first if you want, right?
She means turn your head, you turn your neck to the left and then turn it to the right.
And see how far, you basically want to see how far it could go, which will tell you how much tension is in your neck and back. And then you start to do the seaweed. And what this is, all of us are doing now, it's quite calming to watch you guys do it too. This is a bit of a joke, but I think it might help to make sense, is that swaying very slowly in a very small way from side to side is something that a human being likely would not be doing if they were in immediate danger. This is a gentle safety cue. It also helps your brain and body in a slow and deliberate way map what is going on inside you. So this can help. We haven't touched on interoception very much, but the autonomic nervous system is involved with interoception, which is the detection of, internal cues like hunger and thirst, but also your feelings and your responses to what is happening. It can also be chronic pain. We talk about how neurodiverse people tend to struggle with pain perception, or they have hyperreactivity to pain perception. And so these are the kinds of practices that can help sort of re-regulate and rebalance by essentially cooling the nervous system off, but also giving the brain and the nervous system space to tap in a way that, before I'd started doing these practices, there would be no way I would even sit for 10 seconds to check in on my shoulder or my knee or whatever it might be.
I also just want to stop and make an observation about this wonderful exercise that is definitely going to be in the description below. It takes a tremendous amount of effort and focus to make very small movements.
Correct.
I know.
And slow movements. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I was definitely not going to do that. You were like, seaweed. And I was like, got it. Side to side, like the game, right?
Dodgeball, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was speaking to a client the other day when she was talking about how she stretches a lot, and stretching can be like another really lovely way to regulate the nervous system. I just was thinking about it. I'm like, how do you stretch? Do you is it gentle, or are you just like, no? And she showed me, and she was like cranking her neck, and I was like, okay, let's talk about what kind of message it's sending the nervous system, right? Because if you're cranking your body around, depending on who you are, right? Some people love that, and that feels really good for them, and it only feels really good for them. However, for some of us, and I'm one of these people, being kind of like forceful and really active with my body is their danger cues. So if I'm stretching, even though I want to crank, I really do, it is much better and much more beneficial for me to do things slowly and gently in a more sort of intuitive way. And sometimes like asking yourself a question of like, does this feel kind, can kind of help guide how you are responding to yourself.
Yeah. Well, what do you say to people then who might be like, this is too simple, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Like, I need a 5-step plan because I think a lot of times we do sort of equate extremes with progress. If you said, well, actually, to support the nervous system, you do need to do incredibly intense stretching every day. People, there's some people for whom that would work, would feel better.
I think the most important part of this work is to trust. Like, this is about developing self-trust, and we're all individuals, right? What works for one person is not going to work for the next person. The key here is the intention to respond to your nervous system in a way that is going to, whichever direction you want to go in, whether it's promote calm or peace or safety or whatever it is. I mean, I find this framework really helpful because it helps to, if I'm in a fight-flight state, I know I've got all of this energy, so either I need to cool the energy off or discharge it, for example. Or if I'm in shutdown, it means I'm pretty depleted and I probably just really need to rest, even though I don't want to, right? It sort of can help point me in the right direction. But I think the most important part of this, and the most challenging part, I think, is finding what works for you. What I would say to people who are like, this sounds silly or not for me, that is totally fine as well. But if you feel open to exploring some of this, I would suggest people start with micro moments of this kind of like nervous system regulation. So micro moments of safety or enjoyment or calm or pleasure or whatever it might be. For me, I love watching my tea mix into my milk my milk mix into my tea in the morning. Or like if you're outside in the sun, just feeling the sun on your skin for 2 seconds. Or, watching the birds, or, if your shoelace is in your shoe and it feels uncomfortable, pulling it out. Like anything you can do to make yourself feel even 1% better is nervous system regulation, and you're going in the right direction.
Yeah. Wow, this has been an amazing episode. I feel so relaxed.
Oh, I'm so glad.
It's the most relaxed I've ever felt at the end of an episode.
I will say that there are some, if you're doing this work and you're wanting to calm yourself, if you yawn, if you burp, if your voice gets deeper, those are all some nice cues that rest and digest is coming online. So when people yawn in session, I get really excited because I know they're feeling calm or calmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, thank you so much, Abbie, for coming on and talking to us today about this. It's been so great seeing you sort of go on this journey and do all of this kind of stuff. Tell people where they can find you. You're in our online communities. So
yeah,
you're hanging out. You do the group coaching, the one-on-one sessions, the community. You're chatting there.
Yeah, everywhere, all the time. Memes, nervous system. silly stuff.
Yeah.
Come hang out.
Yeah. I'm everywhere all the time.
But I'm not going to let Abbie get away from that question. If you want to find where she is, you can find her in the you can find her in our unconventional organization community. And this is actually a really wonderful moment because we are all three of us together to say how much I appreciate both of you for being such amazing coaches of multiple years now in our organization. And the amount of people you've touched is huge and is only growing. So it's really, really great. I'm very, very happy to, I'm proud to have you do this with us. So thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, that means a lot. Thank you, Sky.
This has been a beautiful few years.
It has.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Love you.
And get ready for the next installment because obviously there's way more to talk about.
Yeah, I've written a manifesto.
Yeah, seriously, it was so long, but it's, it's so great, especially I'm probably like the least, I think you guys have both been on this journey and I'm probably the furthest away from it, like doing this stuff. So I love taking this opportunity to learn with you. So I'll be the one coming along and being like, what is that? What does that do? It's below the brain. So I don't really understand.
It would be nice to be a brain in a jar sometimes.
Yeah, you were like, we're just a brain in a jar. I was like, I did neuroscience for 4 years. I thought that. I'm pretty sure that's what I thought.
I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. Well, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening, everyone. And a big thank you to Adam for making us sound great and Anastasia for making us look great. We couldn't do it without you.
And if you're looking for any of the references to the papers that we discussed, head on over to our show notes page because I always bring the receipts.
Plus, if you want to find out more about us or any more deep diving into what we're doing, you can find us on Substack. That's where the community is. That's where we're chatting. And you can see all of the fun and exciting things that we are bringing to the table.
Thanks for being here.